MMA is one of the fastest-growing sports in the world, and part of its appeal is how straight-up unpredictable it can be. Crazy upsets that have made fans jump out of their seats, and fights that finished so quickly you didn't even realize they'd started, are a hallmark of the UFC and the huge events it puts on. But sometimes the fights can get just weird, leaving fans with a bad taste in their mouth and wondering what the hell they just watched. So, from the unlikeliest of matchups to craziest fighting styles, these are the most bizarre UFC fights we've ever seen. To kick it off, we're going to take it back a couple of decades. UFC 1 was a unique spectacle to say the least, and in more ways than one. Firstly, there were no weight classes, no judges, no rounds, and the rules were pretty simple. No biting, no eye gouging, no groin shots. No one played by the rules. Arguably, every fight that night was bizarre in its own way, but one that stands out particularly was the bout between Gerard Gordeau and Tila Tooley. Gerard wasn't a small guy, but Tila, a 400-pound sumo wrestler, made him look like a runway model. It seemed the two would be mismatched, but the fight ended in 30 seconds. Ironically, the commentator had just mentioned that endurance would be important in the fight. He must have not seen this coming. Tooley rushed forward. Gordeau, moving backward, punched him squarely in the face a couple of times and knocked him to the ground. Once he was there, Gerard kicked him straight in the jaw, so hard that Tooley's tooth was knocked out into the crowd. So much for the tooth fairy. The ref put a stop to the fight. As you can imagine, Tila's face wasn't looking too good. And that was just UFC 1. Of course, the organization has come a long way since those days, with judges, rounds, plenty more rules, and weight classes. The weight class best known for its heavy hitters and devastating knockouts is, of course, the UFC's heavyweight division. So fans were jumping out of their seats when UFC 226 was announced, pitting two of the hardest punchers in the division against one another, Derek the Black Beast Lewis and Francis the Predator Ngannou. Lewis holds the record for the most knockout wins in UFC history. 13 of his 26 career wins are by KO, while Ngannou is said to throw a punch equivalent to getting hit by a car. I mean, we're talking about two titans here. The fans were psyched when it came to fight night. Rather than the bloody war and straight-up slugfest that they were expecting, the fans got a very different performance. The two fighters were tentative, afraid to make a move. Only 33 strikes were thrown during the whole fight. Lewis was announced the winner by decision, but the fans were the ones who lost out on a real fight that night. It's crazy how what was supposed to be a battle for the ages turned out to be one long yawn. Speaking of disappointments, no one expected Anderson Silva to let fans down, especially not after defeating Forrest Griffin at UFC 101 in one of the most spectacular displays of striking anyone had ever seen. The guy looked like an MMA wizard out there. A very different Anderson showed up to UFC 112 to fight Demian Maia. The fight started off relatively well, with a few fun exchanges and Silva showing off his prowess for striking. Then things got weird. The fight devolved into Anderson showboating.
How about Damian? He says
Dancing around, and a lot of flashy, well, nothing. Maia spent the last 3 rounds chasing Silva around the cage, trying to engage. It even got so bad the referee warned Anderson that if he continued to run around, that he'd deduct some points.
I'm gonna tell you again, you keep running around, it's timidity, I'm gonna take a point away. Don't keep doing it. Hey, next time, 1 point, I'm telling you now.
At the end of the fight, when Anderson was pronounced the winner by unanimous decision, he was met with boos rather than cheers.
The Spider Silva.
Dana White reportedly left during the 4th round and refused to wrap the belt around Silva's waist. And to be honest, who can blame him? That fight was bizarre because of what didn't happen. But some fights are funky because a fighter might try and do too much. And in this next bout, it cost a fighter the win. At UFC Fight Night 158 in Vancouver, Michael Pereira was set to face Sergey Khandozko. When the fight fell through at the beginning of the week, Tristan Connolly moved up a weight class and stepped up to replace Sergey. This was Tristan's UFC debut, and Pereira was the favorite to win by a long shot. Known for his acrobatic style and explosive changes, Michael is the type of fighter to do a backflip onto your head. And when the bell rang that night in Vancouver,
there's the horn. Stand up, Bones, for your hometown guy.
Pereira came out guns blazing, putting on a crazy display of explosive attacks. To everyone's surprise, the newcomer, Connolly, weathered the storm. And in the next 2 rounds, once Michael's gas tank had been emptied, Tristan got to work on one of the most bizarre upsets in UFC history, evading real danger from the muscle-bound Pereira, going for takedowns, ground strikes, earning himself a victory by unanimous decision, and all that on 5 days' notice. If that's not bizarre, then I don't know what is. Sometimes a weird fight isn't even the fighter's fault. At UFC Fight Night 125, a strange fight that left fans feeling uneasy went down between Valentina Shevchenko and Priscilla Cachoeira. Valentina was the favorite to win, a veteran who had come within inches of winning the belt one weight class up. Priscilla? She was, to put it simply, less experienced. The fight went how everyone expected it to. Valentina went out there and elbowed Priscilla, then elbowed her some more, and more. It was hard to watch. There were a few moments in the first round when fans thought the fight should have been stopped. Somehow, Cachoeira made it through the first round and came out into the second, still bleeding from the damage she'd taken. Valentina put the beats on her again and won in the second round via rear naked choke. But the fans felt the fight had gone on too long. Priscilla had taken more damage than was needed, so attention turned to the referee Mario Yamasaki, who was calling the fight. Even Dana White called him out for not stopping the fight earlier.
And I never want to see him reffing ever again.
It seems MMA fans are happy to watch a beatdown, but not when it doesn't feel evenly matched. Speaking of outmatched, no better word could be used to describe the fight between CM Punk and Mickey Gall at UFC 203. MMA fans love a crossover, so the hype started to build when it was announced that CM Punk, the wrestling star, was coming to the UFC. Training under the striking coach, Duke Rufus, it seemed Punk was taking the transition seriously. Fans were hoping that he'd perform well. To say they were disappointed is an understatement. Mickey Gall is not the most famous fighter, and when they fought, his record stood at 2-0. Both wins by rear naked choke. But it was obvious that the fighters were in different leagues as soon as the bell rang. Punk looked like an amateur. Gall took him down immediately, mauled him on the ground, then added a third win by rear naked choke to his record. All within 3 minutes. It should have been obvious that Punk didn't stand a chance. But fans love to root for the underdog. Maybe crossing over wasn't such a great idea. Anyway, the UFC has put on some spectacular shows for almost 30 years. And the sport of MMA keeps blessing us with crazy fights. So expect the unexpected. From brutal beatdowns to frustrating snooze fests, these are the most bizarre UFC fights we've ever seen.